A single mom steps into a dark parking lot. A creep blocks her way. She says, "Don't even think about it." In one move, he's on the ground. The town cheers until a rumor explodes. She's not just a waitress. She's a former Navy SEAL. Whispers turn cruel. A lawsuit flips the story. Her daughter hears the worst. Then a fire rips through the night. The fight gets personal. She wanted a quiet life, but the past won't stay buried. If she stands up, she could save everything she loves or lose it all. When lies close in, will a mother's courage and a soldier's heart be enough? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights of Mason's Diner hummed softly overhead as Sarah Mitchell moved from table to table, her movements practiced and efficient. The checkered vinyl booths, worn smooth from years of use, gleamed under her careful attention. The familiar scent of coffee and apple pie hung in the air, mingling with the lingering aroma of the dinner rush. "Can I get you folks anything else?" Sarah asked, smiling warmly at the elderly couple in booth 6. The Hendersons were regulars, always coming in for their evening coffee and slice of pie. "No, thank you, dear," Mrs. Henderson replied, her weathered face crinkling with affection. "Everything was perfect as always." Sarah tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear, her silver cross necklace catching the light as she moved. "You're too kind, Martha." "Tell your granddaughter I said congratulations on making the honor roll." Mr. Henderson beamed with pride. "That girl's smart as a whip, just like her grandmother." The wall clock above the counter read 9:45 p.m. Sarah's thoughts drifted to Emily, probably sprawled on their old couch with her homework, waiting up despite her mother's instructions to get some sleep. A small smile tugged at her lips. That girl was as stubborn as she was. "Order up!" Jerry, the cook, called from the kitchen. His voice carried through the near-empty diner as Sarah made her way to the counter. "Thanks, Jerry," she said, collecting the plates for her last table of the night, a group of young factory workers who always came in after their shift ended. As she delivered their meals, Sarah couldn't help but notice how the diner's atmosphere changed at night. During the day, it was all hustle and bustle, filled with the chatter of families and the clinking of silverware. But at night, it became something different, a haven for night shift workers, truckers, and folks who just needed a quiet place to think. "Y'all enjoy," she said, setting down the last plate of meatloaf. The young men nodded their thanks, already diving into their late dinner. Sarah moved back to the counter, organizing sugar packets and straightening menus. Her hands kept busy while her mind wandered to home. Emily had seemed quiet lately, more withdrawn than usual. Maybe they could have a movie night this weekend, just the two of them. It had been too long since they'd had proper mother-daughter time. "Sarah?" Betty, the other waitress, touched her arm gently. "I can finish up here if you want to head out early. You've been here since 3. Sarah hesitated, glancing around the diner. Only the factory workers and the Hendersons remained, and Betty could handle that easily enough. "You sure?" "Course, I'm sure." Betty's kind face broke into a knowing smile. "Go home to that girl of yours." Gratitude washed over Sarah. "Thanks, Betty. I owe you one." She made quick work of cashing out her register and gathering her things from the small break room. Her uniform had seen better days, but it was clean and pressed. Sarah took pride in that, just like she took pride in everything she did, no matter how simple the task. "Night, Jerry," she called toward the kitchen, receiving a grunt and a wave in response. The cook wasn't much for words, but they'd worked together long enough to understand each other. Sarah paused at the Hendersons' table on her way out. "You two drive safe now, you hear?" "We always do, dear," Martha assured her, patting her hand. "Give Emily our love." The mention of her daughter brought another smile to Sarah's face.
"Will do."
She pushed through the diner's glass door, the bell jingling cheerfully above her head. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the sweet scent of magnolia blossoms from the tree near the parking lot. Her sensible shoes made soft sounds against the asphalt as she walked, keys already in hand. The parking lot was dimly lit by a single street lamp, casting long shadows across the empty spaces. Most of the staff parked in the back, away from the customer spaces up front. Sarah had always appreciated the quiet of these late nights, the peaceful moments between work and home. But tonight, something felt different. As she approached her old Honda Civic, Sarah's steps slowed. A figure leaned against her driver's side door. Male, medium build, familiar in an unpleasant way. The smell of alcohol reached her before she got too close, and the man's posture screamed trouble. He looked up as she approached, a smirk spreading across his face. Sarah recognized him now. He'd been kicked out of the diner more than once for harassing the waitresses. Her muscles tensed instinctively, though she kept her expression neutral. The street lamp cast harsh shadows across his face, making his grin look more like a grimace. Sarah stood perfectly still, her keys gripped tightly in her hand, as years of training and instinct stirred beneath her carefully maintained facade of an ordinary waitress. Sarah's boots clicked against the asphalt as she made her way through the dimly lit parking lot. The night air carried a hint of fall, and crickets chirped in the darkness beyond the yellow circle of light cast by the lone lamp post. Her keys jingled in her hand as she approached her old blue sedan, but the sight of Carl Jenkins made her steps falter. He was leaning against her driver's side door, his broad frame blocking access to the handle. Even from several feet away, she could smell the whiskey on it. His collar was askew, and his eyes had that glazed look she'd seen too many times during her late shifts. "Well, if it ain't the pretty waitress," Carl slurred, pushing himself off the car with unsteady movements. "Been watching you bounce around in there all night." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Move away from my car, Mr. Jenkins. I need to get home." Carl took a stumbling step toward her, his lips curling into an unpleasant smile. "Oh, come on now. Don't be like that. Just wanted to have a friendly chat." His eyes raked over her figure in a way that made her skin crawl. Sarah shifted her stance slightly, her muscles tensing beneath her waitress uniform. The movement was subtle, something most people wouldn't notice, but it positioned her feet shoulder-width apart, grounding her. "There's nothing friendly about this. Last warning. Step aside." "Or what?" Carl sneered, taking another step closer. His breath reeked of cheap bourbon as he invaded her space. "Gonna serve me some coffee? Maybe call that useless rent-a-cop from the mall?" The diner's bell chimed behind them as a couple of late-night customers pushed through the door. Sarah was acutely aware of their presence, but she kept her eyes fixed on Carl. Her fingers loosened their grip on her keys, letting them slide into her pocket. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Sarah said, her voice dropping lower. "Just walk away." Carl's face twisted with anger. "Nobody talks to me like that, especially not some stuck-up waitress." He lunged forward, his meaty hand reaching for her arm. What happened next was pure muscle memory. Sarah pivoted smoothly, using Carl's own momentum against him. Her right hand caught his extended arm at the wrist, while her left grabbed just above his elbow. In one fluid motion, she stepped into his space, redirecting his forward movement downward. Carl's feet left the ground as Sarah executed a perfect hip throw. He hit the asphalt with a heavy thud that knocked the wind from his lungs. Before he could recover, Sarah had him face down, one arm twisted behind his back in a joint lock that made him yelp in pain. "Don't even think about it," she said coldly, applying just enough pressure to make her point clear. Behind her, she heard the sharp intake of breath from the diner patrons who had witnessed the takedown. The parking lot fell silent except for Carl's ragged breathing and pained groans. The man who had been so bold moments ago now whimpered beneath her grip, his bravado completely deflated. Sarah held him there, her movements precise and controlled, showing no signs of strain or effort. It was as if she'd done this 1,000 times before, because she had. Are you okay, Sarah?" one of the witnesses called out, their voice trembling with concern and amazement. Sarah didn't take her eyes off Carl as she maintained the hold, her face a mask of calm determination. She knew exactly how much pressure to apply, enough to control, not enough to cause lasting damage. The position was textbook perfect, something that would make any combat instructor proud. Carl squirmed once, testing her grip, and immediately regretted it as Sarah adjusted her hold slightly, causing him to gasp. "Please," he wheezed, "let me up. I'm sorry." The man who had been so intimidating just moments ago was now completely subdued, his face pressed against the rough asphalt of the parking lot. Sarah's every movement spoke of years of training she'd hoped she'd never have to use again in civilian life. The diner's door chimed again as more people emerged, drawn by the commotion. They gathered at the edge of the parking lot, their faces showing a mixture of shock and awe at the scene before them. Their quiet, friendly waitress holding down a man twice her size with the skill of a professional. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she maintained her hold on Carl, who was now face down on the rough asphalt of the parking lot. His arms were locked behind his back, in a position that would make any movement on his part extremely uncomfortable. The small crowd of diner patrons who had witnessed the incident stood in stunned silence, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of the parking lot lights. "Someone called the police," a waitress named Betty announced, her voice shaky but relieved. "Sheriff Daniels is on his way." Sarah nodded but didn't loosen her grip. Carl squirmed beneath her, muttering curses under his breath. She could smell the alcohol on him, mixed with sweat and cheap cologne. Her training had kicked in automatically when he'd lunged at her. Muscle memory from years she'd tried to forget. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the cricket-filled night. Red and blue lights bounced off the diner's windows as a police cruiser pulled into the lot. Sheriff Daniels, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and crow's feet around his eyes, stepped out and assessed the scene with practiced calm. "Evening, folks," he said, approaching with measured steps. "Mind telling me what happened here?" "She attacked me," Carl shouted, his face still pressed against the pavement. "Came at me for no reason." One of the diner patrons, an elderly man in a plaid shirt, stepped forward. "That's not what happened, Sheriff. I saw the whole thing from inside. This fellow was waiting by her car. Wouldn't let her pass. Then he came at her." A woman in scrubs nodded vigorously. "I saw it too. She told him to back off, but he wouldn't listen. She only defended herself." Sheriff Daniels knelt beside Sarah and Carl. "Ms. Mitchell, you can let him up now. I'll take it from here." Sarah released her hold and stepped back, straightening her diner uniform. She watched as the sheriff helped Carl to his feet and promptly cuffed him. Carl's face was red with rage and humiliation, a small scrape on his cheek from where he'd hit the pavement. "This ain't over," Carl spat, glaring at Sarah as the sheriff led him to the patrol car. "You think you're tough? You just wait. Nobody makes a fool out of Carl Jenkins." "That's enough out of you," Sheriff Daniels said firmly, guiding him into the back seat. He shut the door on Carl's continued threats and turned back to Sarah. "You okay, Ms. Mitchell?" Sarah nodded, her hands slightly trembling now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "Yes, I'm fine." The sheriff pulled out his notebook. "Mind walking me through what happened?" Sarah recounted the events while the sheriff took notes, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. The witnesses added their accounts, painting a clear picture of Carl's aggression and Sarah's justified response. "Well," Sheriff Daniels said, closing his notebook, "seems pretty clear-cut to me. You've got multiple witnesses, and, frankly, this isn't the first time we've had trouble with Mr. Jenkins. You did everything right, Ms. Mitchell." More cars were pulling into the parking lot now, attracted by the commotion and police lights. Sarah recognized her neighbor's sedan and felt her stomach tighten. If her neighbor was here, that meant Emily would know something had happened. The diner's owner, Joe, pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. He was still wearing his grease-stained apron, his round face flushed from the kitchen heat. "Sarah, just heard what happened. You okay?" "I'm fine, Joe. Really." He shook his head, looking both concerned and impressed. "Never would have guessed you had it in you. Listen, I've been meaning to offer you more shifts anyway. The dinner rush has been picking up. What do you say?" Before Sarah could respond, she heard a familiar voice call out, "Mom!" Emily burst through the crowd, her long brown hair flying behind her as she ran. Sarah opened her arms just in time to catch her daughter in a fierce hug. Emily's heart was racing as fast as her own. "Mrs. Henderson called and said there was trouble at the diner," Emily said, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "She drove me over. Are you okay? What happened?" Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, trying to project a calm she didn't quite feel. "Everything's fine, honey. Just a small problem, but it's all taken care of now." Emily pulled back slightly, her eyes wide as she took in the police car, the gathering of people, and her mother's slightly disheveled appearance. They said you fought someone off?" Sarah met her daughter's gaze, seeing both worry and something else there. Wonder, maybe even pride. "I did what I had to do to stay safe, that's all." Emily's voice dropped to a whisper, full of surprise and curiosity. "I didn't know you could fight like that." Sarah's throat tightened. There was so much Emily didn't know, so much she'd kept hidden over the years. She hugged her daughter close again, buying time before she had to respond. Sheriff Daniels approached them one last time. "Miss Mitchell, we'll need you to come by the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. For now, though, you should head home and get some rest." "Thank you, Sheriff," Sarah said, grateful for the interruption. The crowd began to disperse as the sheriff drove away with Carl in the back of his cruiser. Joe gave Sarah's shoulder a friendly pat. "Take tomorrow off, Sarah. But I meant what I said about the extra shifts. They're yours if you want them." "Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it." As Sarah and Emily walked to their car, Sarah could feel the weight of curious stares following them. The quiet night had been shattered, and with it, perhaps, the careful walls she'd built around her past. Emily's words echoed in her mind. "I didn't know you could fight like that." She helped Emily into the passenger seat and walked around to the driver's side, her hands steady now as she inserted the key into the ignition. The engine hummed to life, and Sarah caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, less hidden, more exposed. Emily watched her with open curiosity, clearly bursting with questions she hadn't yet asked. The fluorescent lights of Johnson's grocery hummed overhead as Sarah pushed her cart down the cereal aisle. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for Emily's favorite breakfast cereal. The events of last night kept replaying in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. "That's her," a woman whispered loudly to her friend near the dairy section. "The one from the diner." Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the shelves, pretending not to hear, but the whispers followed her like persistent shadows. "I heard she took him down in seconds flat," another voice carried across the bread aisle. "Like some kind of ninja. My husband was there," an elderly woman told her companion. "Says he's never seen anything like it. That Carl fellow didn't stand a chance." Sarah's shoulders tensed as she moved through the store. Some customers smiled warmly at her, while others quickly averted their gaze. A young mother pulled her children closer as Sarah passed, as if she were somehow dangerous. The action stung more than Sarah wanted to admit. At the produce section, Sarah carefully selected apples, trying to focus on the simple task. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down, approached with a concerned smile. "Sarah, dear, I just want you to know how brave you were," she said, patting Sarah's arm. "That awful man had it coming. Though I must say, where did a sweet thing like you learn to fight like that?" Sarah managed a polite smile. "Just lucky, I guess. Self-defense classes." The lie felt bitter on her tongue. Well, it was quite something. Though, Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Some folks are saying it looked mighty professional, like military training or something." Sarah's hand tightened around an apple. "I really need to finish my shopping, Mrs. Henderson. Emily will be waiting for breakfast." She moved quickly to the checkout line, where Tommy, the teenage cashier, looked at her with undisguised awe. "That was so cool, Mrs. Mitchell. The way you handled that creep? Like something out of an action movie." "Thanks, Tommy." Sarah tried to keep her voice steady as she loaded her groceries onto the conveyor belt. She could feel more eyes on her, more whispers. "My dad's a cop," Tommy continued enthusiastically as he scanned her items. "He said those were some serious moves you used. Said it looked like professional combat training." Sarah focused on counting out exact change, willing her hands not to shake. "Your total is 47.82, Tommy announced, still grinning at her like she was some kind of superhero. As she gathered her bags, a deep voice behind her made her freeze. "Need help with those bags, ma'am?" Sarah turned to find Mr. Wallace, the retired veteran who lived in the old Victorian house on Oak Street. His eyes, kind but knowing, studied her face. She'd always been careful to avoid more than casual greetings with him, sensing somehow that he might see through her carefully constructed facade. "No, thank you," Sarah replied quickly. "I can manage." But Mr. Wallace fell into step beside her as she headed for the exit. His movements were measured, deliberate, the walk of a man who had seen combat. Sarah recognized it because she saw the same qualities in herself, carefully hidden beneath her waitress uniform and mom jeans. "Beautiful morning," he commented casually as they stepped into the sunlight. "Though I imagine it feels better than last night did." Sarah nodded stiffly, quickening her pace slightly. Mr. Wallace matched it effortlessly. "You know," he continued conversationally, "I've seen a lot of self-defense moves in my time. Marine Corps taught me plenty." He paused, watching her reaction. "But what you did last night? That was something else entirely." Sarah's heart pounded as she reached her car. She busied herself with loading the groceries, hoping he would take the hint and leave. The way you took control of the situation, Mr. Burr, Wallace went on, his voice gentle but firm. The precision of your movements, the instant threat assessment, the perfect execution of that hold. Sarah closed the trunk, her movements mechanical. She needed to leave. Now. But Mr. Wallace stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. That wasn't just self-defense. That was SEAL training, wasn't it? Sarah froze, her hand still on the trunk of her car, her world suddenly tilting on its axis. The kitchen was filled with a comforting aroma of spaghetti sauce as Sarah stirred the pot on the stove. The familiar routine helped steady her nerves after the long day of whispers and stares. Emily sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out before her, but Sarah could feel her daughter's eyes following her every move. Mom? Emily's voice was hesitant. Who's Mr. Wallace? Sarah's hand paused mid-stir. She took a deep breath, buying time as she reached for the dried basil. He's a retired veteran who lives over on Oak Street. I heard Jenny's mom talking about him when she dropped me off. She said he recognized you from somewhere. Emily's pencil tapped against her textbook. And he said something about SEAL training? The wooden spoon clinked against the pot as Sarah set it down. She turned to face her daughter leaning against the counter. Emily's dark eyes, so much like her father's, were filled with curiosity and something else. Uncertainty. Let's eat first, Sarah said softly. Then we'll talk. Dinner was quieter than usual. Emily picked at her food, stealing glances at her mother between bites. When they finished, Sarah cleared the plates, taking longer than necessary to load the dishwasher. Finally, she sat across from Emily at the kitchen table. What you saw last night? Sarah began, her fingers curling around her coffee mug. Those moves I used, they weren't just random self-defense. She paused, gathering courage. Before you were born. Before I met your father. I served in the Navy. Emily's eyes widened. Like on ships? Sometimes. Sarah smiled faintly. But mostly, I was part of a special team, the SEALs. But, Emily's forehead creased in confusion. I thought SEALs were all men? That's what most people think. There weren't many women, but we were there. Sarah's voice grew quiet. We worked just as hard, trained just as long, sometimes harder, to prove ourselves. Emily pushed her math homework aside, completely forgotten. Why didn't you ever tell me? Sarah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. When your father died, I wanted to start fresh, to give you a normal life, away from. She swallowed hard. Away from violence and danger. The memories weren't always easy to carry. But you were like a hero? Emily's voice held a mix of awe and uncertainty. Sarah shook her head. I was a soldier doing my job. Sometimes that job was hard. Sometimes it meant making choices She stopped, seeing the questions multiplying in Emily's eyes. Did you fight in wars? Emily whispered. Yes. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. In places where people needed help, where there was no one else to protect them. Emily pulled her hand back slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. Did you have to hurt people? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt her throat tighten. I did what was necessary to protect others, to protect my team. But that's not who I am anymore, Emily. I'm your mom. I work at the diner. I help with your homework and burn cookies on weekends. But last night, with that man, Emily's voice trembled. It was like you were a different person. Sarah stood up, moving around the table to kneel beside her daughter's chair. Listen to me, sweetheart. Everything I learned, everything I was trained to do, it's all to protect what matters most. And nothing matters more to me than you. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared, Mom. Not of you, but what if that man comes back? What if people start treating us differently now that they know? Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug, feeling Emily's tears dampen her shoulder. We're going to be okay. This town has been our home for 10 years. One night isn't going to change that. But even as she spoke the words, Sarah wasn't entirely sure she believed them. They sat there for a long while, mother and daughter, as the kitchen grew dark around them. Finally, Emily pulled back, wiping her eyes. Can you teach me? She asked suddenly. Not everything, just how to be strong like you? Sarah brushed Emily's hair back from her face, seeing both fear and determination in her expression. Being strong isn't just about fighting, honey. It's about knowing when not to fight, about choosing love over fear. Emily nodded slowly. Like you did, when you chose to be just my mom? Yes, Sarah whispered, her heart aching with love and worry. Exactly like that. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Sarah knelt beside her own bed. The moonlight streaming through her window cast long shadows across the floor. She hadn't prayed much since leaving the service, too many questions, too much guilt. But tonight, the words came easily. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, "help me protect her. Not just from danger, but from the weight of my past. Help me show her that love is stronger than fear." She stayed there, on her knees, torn between relief that the truth was finally out and dread of what tomorrow might bring. The secret she'd carried for so long had been a heavy burden, but at least it had been familiar. Now, in its place, was something far more uncertain. Hope mixed with fear, pride tangled with shame, and above all, the fierce need to shield her daughter from the shadows of her former life. Sarah stood at her kitchen counter, methodically chopping vegetables for a stew. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board helped quiet her mind after the past few days of upheaval. Emily sat at the dining table, textbooks spread out as she worked on her homework, occasionally glancing up at her mother with a mix of curiosity and concern. A knock at the door broke their peaceful evening routine. Sarah's hand stilled on the knife, and she exchanged a quick look with Emily. It was nearly 8 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. "I'll get it," Sarah said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Through the window, she caught sight of the familiar police cruiser parked in their driveway. Her stomach tightened. Sheriff Daniels stood on her porch, his weathered face grave beneath his department cap. He held a manila envelope in one hand. "Evening, Sarah," he said, his usual warm smile absent. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" Sarah stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Of course. Emily and I were just making dinner. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you." He followed her into the kitchen, nodding a greeting to Emily. "This won't take long, but you might want to sit down." Sarah pulled out a kitchen chair, her movements deliberately calm despite the growing knot in her chest. Emily had stopped writing, her pencil hovering above her notebook. "What's going on, Sheriff?" Daniels sighed, placing the envelope on the table. "Carl Jenkins filed a lawsuit against you this afternoon. He's claiming you assaulted and harassed him in that parking lot." The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. Sarah's fingers gripped the edge of the table. "What?" "He's twisted the whole story around," Daniels continued, his voice tight with contained anger. "Claims you confronted him without provocation, that he was just minding his own business when you attacked him. Says he's got witnesses." "That's ridiculous," Emily burst out. "Mom would never—" "Emily," Sarah said quietly, and her daughter fell silent, though her face flushed with indignation. Sarah reached for the envelope with steady hands, years of training helping her maintain her composure. Inside were legal documents, dense with official language. Terms like assault, battery, and emotional distress jumped out at her. "He's asking for $50,000 in damages," Daniels said. "Claims he's got medical bills from injuries sustained during the incident." Sarah's jaw clenched. "The only injury he got was to his pride when I stopped him from attacking me." "You and I both know that," Daniels agreed. "And we've got witnesses who saw what really happened. But Jenkins has friends in town who are willing to back up his version of events. He's playing this smart, Sarah. He's painting you as some kind of militant aggressor." Sarah's eyes fell on a particular paragraph in the lawsuit. Her throat went dry as she read. "The defendant, Sarah Mitchell, utilized advanced military combat techniques, demonstrating a clear intent to cause grievous bodily harm. He's using my service record against me," she said softly. Daniels nodded grimly. "Word's gotten around about your background. Jenkins is trying to spin it like you're some kind of dangerous element in the community. He's already been talking to anyone who'll listen about how you're unstable and violent." Sarah felt sick. Everything she'd feared about her past coming to light was happening. She'd spent years building a quiet, peaceful life for Emily, trying to leave behind the weight of her military service. Now it was being twisted into a weapon against her. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "First thing tomorrow, I'm connecting you with the county's Veterans Legal Aid Office," Daniel said. "They've got experience with cases like this. And Sarah." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Don't let this shake you. Jenkins is counting on you being too afraid of exposure to fight back. But you've got allies here." Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the implications. Legal fees, court appearances, publicity, her carefully constructed world of anonymity crumbling. "The diner," she started. Joe's already told me he's standing behind you 100%, Daniels cut in. Your job's safe, and I've got statements from 3 customers who witnessed the whole thing. We'll fight this. A small sound made Sarah turn. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, her face pale. Mom, are we in trouble? Sarah looked down at the lawsuit in her hands, the paper trembling slightly. All her years of training, all her missions, all the time she'd faced down death without flinching. None of it had prepared her for the fear she saw in her daughter's eyes. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pulled into the VFW Hall parking lot. The old brick building stood quietly in the morning sun, its American flag hanging limp in the still air. She'd driven past this place hundreds of times but had never gone inside. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of her car. Mr. Wallace was already waiting by the entrance, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile. He wore a plain button-down shirt with pressed khakis, looking every bit the dignified veteran he was. Glad you came, Sarah, he said warmly, holding the door open for her. I know this isn't easy. The interior was dim and cool, smelling of coffee and wood polish. A few older veterans sat at tables, playing cards or reading newspapers. They looked up briefly, nodding and greeting before returning to their activities. Coffee? Mr. Wallace asked, leading her to a quiet corner table. Please, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched as he poured 2 cups from a nearby pot, noting how steady his hands were despite his age. So, he said, settling into his chair, tell me about this lawsuit. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Carl Jenkins is claiming I attacked him without provocation, that I used excessive force, and, she swallowed hard, that my military training makes me dangerous to the community. Mr. Wallace's expression hardened. I know Carl's type, bullies who can't handle being stood up to, especially by a woman. He leaned forward. Sarah, I've got some friends who might be able to help. Veterans advocacy lawyers who specialize in cases like yours. I can't afford a lawyer, Sarah admitted, staring into her coffee. These folks work pro bono for veterans, Mr. Wallace explained. In fact, he checked his watch. They should be here any minute. As if on cue, the door opened, and 2 people walked in, a tall woman in a crisp suit and a younger man carrying a leather briefcase. Linda Mark, Mr. Wallace called out, waving them over. This is Sarah Mitchell. Linda Martinez extended her hand with a warm smile. Former JAG Corps, she explained. Now I help veterans navigate legal challenges. Her grip was firm, professional. Mr. Wallace filled me in on the basics. Mark Chen, the younger lawyer, pulled out a chair. We've dealt with similar cases before, he said, opening his briefcase. People trying to exploit veteran service records against them. Sarah felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly. These people spoke her language, direct, practical, understanding the weight of service. Tell us everything, Linda said, pulling out a notepad. Start with the night at the diner. For the next hour, Sarah recounted every detail. Carl's harassment, her defensive moves, the witnesses. Linda and Mark took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. This is actually a strong case in your favor, Linda said finally. Multiple witnesses confirm his aggressive behavior. The sheriff's report clearly states you acted in self-defense. And your military record? That's not a liability. It's proof you're trained to use appropriate force. But what about the community? Sarah asked quietly. The whispers are already starting. Mr. Wallace placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The community needs to see that your service isn't something to fear. It's something that prepared you to protect yourself, your daughter, others. Speaking of protection, Mark added, we should file a restraining order against Jenkins. His threat of revenge concerns me. They spent another hour going through paperwork, Linda explaining each document in clear terms. For the first time since receiving the lawsuit notice, Sarah felt steady ground beneath her feet. We'll file these first thing tomorrow, Linda assured her, gathering the papers. And Sarah? You're not alone in this fight. Sarah blinked back unexpected tears. Thank you. All of you. Mr. Wallace walked her to her car. You know, he said thoughtfully, sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest testimonies. Sarah managed a small smile. I just want to protect Emily from all this. She's stronger than you think, he replied. And so are you. The drive home felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her burden had physically lessened its weight. But as Sarah pulled into her driveway, that peace evaporated. Through the open kitchen window, she could hear Emily's voice, tight with emotion, speaking on the phone. "I don't know who my mom is anymore," Emily was saying. Was she really a killer? Sarah froze, her hand still on the car door. The word killer echoed in her mind like a gunshot. All the carefully constructed walls she'd built to protect Emily from her past seemed to crumble in that moment. Her daughter's voice cracked as she continued speaking to her friend. "Everyone at school is talking about it. Like she's some kind of, I don't know. I just want my normal mom back." Sarah's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stood there, unable to move, as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. This was exactly what she'd feared, that her past would taint how Emily saw her, that the truth would destroy the safe, loving world she'd tried so hard to create for her daughter. The sound of Emily's bedroom door closing finally broke Sarah's paralysis. She wiped her eyes with trembling hands, but the pain in her chest remained, raw and throbbing. Her daughter's words played on repeat in her mind. "I don't know who my mom is anymore." The truth was, Sarah sometimes didn't know either. She'd spent so long burying that part of herself, trying to be just Sarah the mom, Sarah the waitress. But now, with her past exposed, those carefully separated pieces of herself were colliding, and her daughter was caught in the impact. Sarah stared at the thick manila envelope on her kitchen counter, her heart sinking as she read the official court summons inside. The legal language was cold and formal, laying out Carl Jenkins' accusations in stark black and white. According to the paperwork, she had violently and without provocation assaulted him. The lies made her stomach turn. She poured herself a cup of coffee, hoping the familiar routine would steady her nerves. The morning sun streamed through her kitchen window, catching dust motes in its golden light. It should have been peaceful, but Sarah couldn't shake the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Betty at the diner. "You won't believe what they're saying now." Sarah didn't want to know, but she needed to. The rumors had been getting worse all week. Some claimed she'd been discharged dishonorably. Others whispered about PTSD episodes and violent outbursts. None of it was true. But truth seemed to matter less than scandal in their small town. The bell at Mason's general store tinkled as Sarah pushed through the door later that morning. She needed groceries, and she refused to let gossip keep her from living her life. The usual friendly greetings were noticeably absent. Mrs. Mason, who had always chatted warmly with her, suddenly became very interested in reorganizing the canned goods. "Did you hear?" A stage whisper carried clearly from the next aisle. "They say she killed people overseas, with her bare hands." "I always thought there was something off about her," another voice replied. "So quiet, keeping to herself. Now we know why." Sarah gripped her shopping basket tighter, knuckles white. She grabbed what she needed quickly, trying to ignore the sideways glances and sudden silences that followed her through the store. At the checkout, young Tommy Mason, who usually joked with her, rang up her items without meeting her eyes. Outside, Sarah nearly collided with Helen Parker, one of her regular customers from the diner. Helen clutched her purse closer and hurried past without a word. The gesture stung more than Sarah wanted to admit. Back in her car, Sarah allowed herself a moment of weakness. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, breathing deeply. The familiar scent of leather and the old pine air freshener helped ground her. She'd faced worse than this. Much worse. Her phone rang. It was Mr. Wallace from the Veterans Group. "How are you holding up?" his gravelly voice asked. "The summons came today," Sarah replied, straightening in her seat. "And half the town seems to think I'm some kind of monster." "Let them talk," Mr. Wallace said firmly. "We've got your back. The legal team is already working on your defense. Your service record speaks for itself." "Does it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Because right now it seems to be speaking against me. Truth will out, Sarah. Remember what we fought for. Justice, freedom, protecting the innocent. That's who you are, not whatever garbage Jenkins and his cronies are spreading." After hanging up, Sarah drove home slowly, noticing how people on the sidewalk seemed to turn away as her car passed. The town she'd chosen as a safe haven was becoming hostile territory. Emily's backpack was by the door when Sarah got home, but the house was quiet. She found her daughter in the kitchen, staring at her phone with red-rimmed eyes. "Em? What's wrong?" Emily looked up, her face a mixture of hurt and anger.
Why didn't you tell me everything, Mom? About what you did in the Navy?
Sarah's heart clenched. What are you talking about? Lacey's mom showed her some articles about female Navy SEALs, about missions and killing people. Emily's voice cracked. Kids at school are saying you're dangerous, that you're a trained killer. Sarah set her groceries down slowly, choosing her words carefully. I served my country, Emily. Yes, that sometimes meant combat, but everything I did was to protect people, to save lives. But you never told me. Emily's voice rose. I had to hear it from other people. Do you know how that feels? I wanted to protect you from that part of my life, Sarah said softly. Maybe that was wrong, but I never lied to you about who I am now. Your mother, who loves you more than anything. Emily's lower lip trembled. What's going to happen with the lawsuit? Are we going to have to leave town? Sarah moved to her daughter, pulling her into a tight hug. Emily resisted for a moment before melting into her mother's embrace. Sarah could feel her daughter's tears soaking into her shirt. Listen to me, Sarah said, her voice firm but gentle. We are not running away. What Carl Jenkins is doing is wrong, and I'm going to fight it. The right way, through the courts. She pulled back slightly, looking into Emily's eyes. I protected people as a SEAL, and I'll protect us now. That's who I am, not what people are saying about me. Emily wiped her eyes. But everyone's talking. Even teachers look at me different now. Let them talk, Sarah said, echoing Mr. Wallace's words. We know the truth, and I promise you this. I will fight this, and I will fight for us, always. Sarah parked her truck outside the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, her hands tight on the steering wheel. The brick building looked weathered but welcoming, with an American flag snapping in the breeze out front. Mr. Wallace had insisted she come to tonight's support meeting, but her feet felt like lead as she approached the entrance. You made it. Mr. Wallace's familiar face greeted her at the door. His weathered features creased into a warm smile as he ushered her inside. Come on in. We've got coffee and some halfway decent cookies. The meeting room was simple. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and a coffee station in the corner that filled the air with the rich scent of brewing coffee. About a dozen people were already there, some in civilian clothes, others still wearing parts of their service uniforms, like well-worn caps or jackets. Everyone, this is Sarah Mitchell, Mr. Wallace announced, the one I told you about from the diner incident. A woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun stood up first. I'm Margaret, 20 years Army Rangers. She extended her hand with a firm grip. Glad you could join us. One by one, the others introduced themselves. Dave from the Marines, Jason, who'd served in Afghanistan, Lisa, who'd been a combat medic. Each face held understanding. Each handshake conveyed solidarity. These people knew what it meant to carry the weight of service, to build a life after uniform. Have a seat. Margaret patted the chair next to her. We were just talking about civilian adjustment. Sound familiar? Sarah managed a small nod as she sat down, clutching her styrofoam coffee cup like a lifeline. The circle felt intimate, almost too close, but something in her chest began to loosen as the conversation flowed around her. It's like speaking a different language sometimes, Jason was saying. My kids don't understand why I still get up at 500 every morning, why I need everything in its place. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Sarah found herself nodding along, thinking of Emily's confusion over her meticulous habits. Sarah? Margaret turned to her gently. Want to share what brought you here? Sarah took a deep breath, studying the dark surface of her coffee. I've spent years trying to leave it all behind. Be just a mom, just a waitress. Then one night, my training kicked in when I needed it. And now, she swallowed hard. Now my daughter looks at me like I'm a stranger, and half the town thinks I'm dangerous. Been there, Lisa spoke up, her voice soft but strong. We all have, in different ways. That's why we're here. Because civilians don't always understand, but we do. The lawsuits got you scared, Mr. Wallace stated matter-of-factly. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. I did everything by the book. Minimal force, clear warning. But he's twisting it all around, making me sound like some kind of... She couldn't finish. Some kind of warrior? Dave completed her thought. That's what you are, Sarah. A warrior who protected herself and others. There's no shame in that. My daughter heard someone call me a killer, Sarah whispered, the words bitter on her tongue. Margaret reached over and covered Sarah's hand with her own. Listen to me. We defended our country. We protected people who couldn't protect themselves. That doesn't make us killers. It makes us guardians. Your daughter will understand that, given time. Tell us about her, Jason encouraged, leaning forward in his chair. A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips. Emily. She's 15, smart as a whip, writes beautiful stories. Has her father's eyes. Her voice caught, but this time, it didn't feel like drowning. She's the reason I left service. After her dad died, I couldn't bear the thought of her losing both parents. That's strength right there, Lisa nodded firmly. The strength to choose, to put family first. Same strength that helped you handle that drunk at the diner. You're not alone anymore, Sarah, Mr. Wallace added. We've got your back, with the lawsuit, with everything. These people, he gestured around the circle, they're the best lawyers, counselors, and friends you could ask for. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something inside her shift and settle. These people understood the weight she carried. They knew what it meant to balance duty with peace, strength with gentleness. Their acceptance wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Someone shared a story about a disastrous attempt at civilian dating, and genuine laughter bubbled up in the room. Sarah found herself joining in, the sound strange but wonderful in her throat. It felt like opening a window in a stuffy room, letting fresh air rush in. As the laughter faded, she caught movement in the doorway. Emily stood there, having arrived to pick her up as arranged, watching the scene with wide eyes. Their gazes met across the room, and Sarah saw something shift in her daughter's expression. Confusion, mixed with curiosity, and maybe a hint of understanding. Sarah's laugh lingered in the air between them, and for just a moment, she glimpsed hope in Emily's slight smile. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was a start. The veterans around her continued sharing stories, their voices warm and real, while Emily lingered in the doorway. In that moment, Sarah felt the first real peace she'd known since that night in the diner parking lot. She wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to help her daughter understand too. The county courthouse loomed over Sarah like a mountain of brick and judgment. She smoothed her navy blue blazer, a trembling hand running over the crisp fabric. Emily squeezed her other hand tight as they climbed the worn stone steps. You look perfect, Mom, Emily whispered, her young face full of concern. Like a real professional, Sarah managed a small smile, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse's tall windows as they made their way to Courtroom B. Inside, the wood-paneled room already held a scatter of spectators, some friendly faces from the diner, a few veterans she recognized from the VFW, and unfortunately, several of Carl's drinking buddies who glared at her from the back row. Mr. Wallace sat in the front row, ramrod straight in his pressed khakis and white shirt. He gave Sarah a firm nod as she passed. Her attorney, Jessica Chen from the Veterans Advocacy Group, waited at the defense table with neat stacks of papers before her. Remember what we discussed, Jessica murmured as Sarah took her seat. Stay calm, no matter what they say. Let them see your dignity. The bailiff's voice rang out. All rise. The Honorable Judge Marcus Thompson presiding. Sarah stood, her legs feeling wooden. As everyone settled again, she caught sight of Carl Jenkins slouching at the plaintiff's table in an ill-fitting suit. His attorney, Trevor Burke, was everything Sarah had feared. Sleek, expensive-looking, with the kind of smile that could cut glass. Your Honor, Burke began, rising smoothly to his feet. This case is about a dangerous individual who chose to use excessive, potentially lethal force against my client, Mr. Jenkins, in what should have been nothing more than a minor verbal disagreement. Sarah's fingers curled into fists under the table as Burke paced before the judge. The defendant, Sarah Mitchell, is a former Navy SEAL, trained in dozens of ways to kill. On the night in question, she chose to attack my client, a local businessman who merely wished to speak with her. Businessman? Sarah heard Emily whisper in disbelief from the gallery. He's a drunk who harasses women. Jessica touched Sarah's arm in warning as Burke continued his opening statement. We will prove that Ms. Mitchell's military background has left her unstable, prone to violent outbursts, and a danger to this community. My client required medical attention after her unprovoked assault. The bruising on his face and arms took weeks to heal. Burke gestured dramatically. This is exactly the kind of volatile, traumatized veteran we read about in the papers. Someone who can't leave the war behind. Someone who sees threats everywhere and responds with deadly force to innocent situations. Sarah felt her chest tighten as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Burke was twisting everything, her service, her training, her protective instincts, making them sound twisted and wrong. Furthermore, Burke continued, we have evidence of Ms. Mitchell's involvement in classified military operations overseas, operations that required the kind of violence most of us couldn't imagine. Is this really someone we want working in our local diner, interacting with our families? Sarah stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as Burke pulled out a stack of papers. I have here Ms. Mitchell's partially redacted service record. While many details remain classified, what we can see paints a disturbing picture. Multiple combat deployments, advanced combat training, expertise in what the military calls threat elimination. He practically spat the last words, making them sound like something dirty. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Everything she'd done, every mission, every risk, had been to protect people, to save lives. Now this snake of a lawyer was turning it all poison. My client simply approached Ms. Mitchell to ask about her working hours, hoping to arrange a coffee date. Instead, she attacked him with military precision, using techniques designed for battlefield elimination of enemy combatants. Mr. Jenkins feared for his life. Sarah heard a quiet scoff from Mr. Wallace's direction. She wanted to turn around, to see the supportive faces she knew were there, but she kept her eyes forward. Just like in training, focus on the mission. Control your emotions. Burke walked closer to the defense table, his voice dropping to a theatrical near whisper. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, do we want someone with this kind of violent background, this kind of killer instinct, freely walking our streets, working in our restaurants, living next door to our children? Objection, Your Honor. Jessica was on her feet. Counsel is engaging in inflammatory rhetoric and character assassination. Sustained, Judge Thompson said firmly. Mr. Burke, stick to the facts of the case. Burke spread his hands in a false show of apology. Of course, Your Honor. I simply want the court to understand the full context of my client's legitimate fears. He returned to his table, but the damage was done. Sarah could feel the shifted energy in the room, the sideways glances, the uncertain whispers. Everything she'd feared was happening. Her past, her service, her sacrifices were being twisted into weapons against her. She felt Jessica's hand on her arm again, steadying her. Looking up, she saw Mr. Wallace in the gallery, his face set in quiet determination. He gave her a slight, reassuring nod. The kind of nod she'd seen 1,000 times in the field. The silent message between warriors. Stand firm. Hold the line. We've got your back. Jessica stood, adjusting her jacket. Your Honor, when you hear the full story, not this sensationalized version, you'll understand that Miss Mitchell acted with appropriate restraint in response to a genuine threat. We have multiple witnesses who will testify to Mr. Jenkins' aggressive behavior that night, and to his history of harassing women in our community. Sarah took a deep breath, drawing strength from her attorney's confident tone. Jessica had warned her this would be rough, that the other side would try to use her military service against her, but knowing it was coming didn't make it hurt any less. She thought of Emily sitting behind her, hearing all this. What was her daughter thinking now? Did she believe Burke's twisted version of events? Did she see her mother as some kind of monster? Ms. Mitchell's military service is not on trial here, Jessica continued, her voice clear and strong. Her training enabled her to handle a threatening situation without anyone being seriously injured. She showed exactly the kind of judgment and restraint we should admire, not condemn. Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope as Jessica organized her papers, preparing to present their side of the story. Mr. Wallace caught her eye again, giving another firm nod. In that moment, Sarah straightened her spine, lifting her chin slightly. She had faced worse than Carl Jenkins and his slick lawyer. She had survived firefights and sandstorms, protected her team through impossible odds. She could survive this, too. The truth was on her side. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Sarah pushed her meatloaf around the plate, barely able to stomach food after the grueling day in court. Across the table, Emily hadn't touched her dinner either, just stabbed at her green beans with mechanical precision. The words from Carl's lawyer still rang in Sarah's ears. A trained killer, dangerous, unpredictable. She watched Emily's downcast face, wondering what similar thoughts might be running through her daughter's mind. The screech of Emily's fork against the plate made them both wince. Emily set down her utensils and took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Did you kill people, Mom?" The question hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Sarah's throat went dry. She'd known this moment would come, had dreaded it since the day Emily was born. But nothing had prepared her for the raw pain in her daughter's voice. Sarah carefully placed her own fork down. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." Emily's face paled. "How many?" "Emily." Sarah's voice cracked. "I need to know," Emily insisted, her blue eyes filling with tears. "Everyone at school is talking about it. Jessie's mom won't let her come over anymore. She says you're dangerous." Sarah's chest tightened. She pushed her plate away and folded her hands on the table, trying to find the right words. "I was a Navy SEAL. My job was to protect people, to save lives. Sometimes, that meant taking lives to save others. But you actually killed people." Emily's voice rose slightly. "With your hands? With guns?" Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Memories she'd tried so hard to bury rushing back. The desert heat. The sound of gunfire. The weight of responsibility. "Yes, both. I did what I had to do to keep my team alive and complete our missions, to protect innocent people. Were they bad people?" Emily's question came out small, almost pleading. Sarah met her daughter's gaze. "Most were people who had chosen to hurt others. Terrorists. But war isn't simple, honey. Sometimes." She swallowed hard. "Sometimes you don't know everything about the person on the other end of your scope. That's why I left. That's why I wanted a different life for us." Emily pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the linoleum. "But you're still that person. I saw how you took down Carl. It was like it was nothing to you." "I will always protect you," Sarah said firmly. "Those skills saved us both that night." "But Mom, you lied to me my whole life." Emily's voice cracked. "I thought you were just normal. A regular mom who worked at the diner. Now I find out you're some kind of... I'm still me," Sarah said softly. "Still your mother. Everything I've done, everything I am, it's all been for you." Emily shook her head, tears now falling freely. "Did Dad know about all of it?" "Yes. He was Navy too. That's how we met. So I'm the only one who didn't know." Emily wrapped her arms around herself. "Do you have nightmares about it? About the people you—" Sarah nodded slowly. "Sometimes. That's why I started going to the VA meetings. To talk about it with others who understand. Is that why you never let me have sleepovers? Why you always check the doors 3 times before bed? Why you made me learn all those safety protocols?" Emily's voice grew harder with each question. "Partly," Sarah admitted. "The world can be dangerous. I wanted you to be prepared, but I also wanted to protect you from knowing too much, from knowing this part of me." Emily stood up suddenly, her chair tipping backward. She caught it before it fell, her movements sharp with anger. "Well, now I know, and I don't." Her voice hitched. "I don't know if I can handle this." Sarah reached out, but Emily stepped back, shaking her head. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I don't know if I can handle this," and fled the kitchen. Sarah remained at the table, listening to Emily's footsteps pounding up the stairs, followed by the slam of her bedroom door. The kitchen clock continued its steady tick-tick-tick, counting out the seconds of this new reality where her daughter finally knew the truth. Her hands trembled as she picked up their barely touched plates. The meatloaf had gone cold, congealed gravy forming a skin on top. Such a normal dinner. Such an abnormal conversation. Sarah scraped the food into the trash, each scrape of the plate like a physical pain in her chest. The running water from the faucet couldn't drown out the sound of Emily's muffled sobs from upstairs. Sarah gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. She'd faced firefights and death without flinching, but her daughter's tears cut deeper than any wound she'd ever received. She mechanically washed the dishes, dried them, put them away, each movement precise, controlled, just like her training had taught her. But inside, her heart was breaking. The very skills that had kept her alive, that had protected her country and her daughter, were now threatening to destroy the most precious relationship in her life. Water dripped from the faucet, each drop echoing in the silent kitchen. Sarah stared at her reflection in the window above the sink, seeing not the diner waitress she'd pretended to be for so long, but the warrior she'd once been. Both were real. Both were her. But now she had to find a way to help her daughter understand that they could coexist in the mother she'd always been. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Sarah pushed open the glass door, the familiar bell chiming above her head. The breakfast rush was just winding down, and the smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around her like a warm blanket. "Sarah," Betty, one of the older waitresses, rushed over with tears in her eyes. "We've all been talking about what happened in court yesterday. It's just not right, what they're saying about you." Sarah managed a weak smile, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. She hadn't slept much, Emily's questions from last night echoing in her mind. The diner felt different now. Every booth held memories of regular customers who used to greet her warmly but now avoided her gaze. "Come here, honey." Betty guided her to the counter where a sheet of paper lay, covered in signatures. "We started a petition. Everyone who knows you, who's seen how kind you are with customers, how hard you work, they're all signing it." Sarah's vision blurred as she read the words at the top. "In support of Sarah Mitchell, a valued member of our community." Below were dozens of signatures, other waitresses, cooks, regular customers, even the evening janitor. "I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered, running her finger over the names. "Don't say anything." Betty squeezed her shoulder. "Just know you're not alone." The kitchen door swung open, and Marco, the head cook, emerged with a steaming plate of pancakes. "On the house," he said firmly, sliding them in front of her. "Can't fight battles on an empty stomach." Sarah's throat tightened. These people, her work family, they'd seen her every day for years. They knew her as she was now, not as the soldier Carl's lawyer had portrayed. The diner's door chimed again, and Sheriff Daniels walked in, his badge catching the morning light. He removed his hat and sat on the stool next to Sarah, ordering coffee with a nod to Betty. "Thought I might find you here," he said quietly, his weathered face serious but kind. "Got something you should know." Sarah braced herself for more bad news, but the sheriff's next words surprised her. "I've been keeping files on Carl Jenkins for years. Multiple complaints of harassment, drunk, and disorderly conduct, threats against women." He stirred sugar into his coffee. "Never had enough to make serious charges stick. You know how it goes in small towns. Victims get scared, withdraw complaints. But I've got it all documented." "You'll testify?" Sarah asked, hope flickering in her chest. "Already told your lawyer I would." He met her eyes. "That man's been terrorizing women in this town for too long. What you did that night? Standing up to him? That took real courage." Sarah's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "Doesn't feel like courage now. Feels like it's all falling apart. My daughter." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Emily's a smart girl," the sheriff said. "Give her time. Truth has a way of rising to the surface." More workers began signing the petition as they arrived for their shifts. Mary from the afternoon shift wrote a whole paragraph about how Sarah had driven her to doctor's appointments when her car broke down. Jim, the dishwasher, mentioned how Sarah always made sure he got leftover meals to take home to his kids. "Remember when that elderly couple's car broke down?" Betty was telling anyone who would listen. Sarah not only helped them call a tow truck, she paid for their meal and sat with them for 2 hours until their son could pick them up. Each story, each signature felt like a small weight lifting from Sarah's shoulders. These weren't just character witnesses. They were reminders of who she'd become, the life she'd built after leaving the military. The morning crowd thinned out, leaving the diner in that quiet lull between breakfast and lunch. Sarah sat reading through the messages of support, letting them wash away some of the courtroom's bitter taste. The bell chimed once more. Sarah didn't look up immediately, but she felt a presence beside her. When she turned, her heart stopped. Emily stood there, still in her school clothes, her backpack clutched tight against her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was something different in them today. Not the fear and confusion of last night, but something softer, questioning. Without a word, Emily slid onto the stool next to Sarah. For a moment, they sat in silence, the petition lying between them. Emily's eyes scanned the signatures, the messages, the outpouring of support from people who knew her mother as she truly was. Then, slowly, carefully, Emily's hand moved across the counter and found Sarah's. Her fingers were warm and sure as they wrapped around her mother's. Sarah held her breath, afraid to break this fragile moment. Around them, the diner continued its morning rhythm, coffee being poured, orders being called, lives going on. But in this small space between mother and daughter, something was healing, one gentle heartbeat at a time. Betty appeared with a chocolate milkshake, Emily's favorite, and set it down without a word, just a understanding smile. Emily's hand stayed firmly in Sarah's, a silent bridge across the gulf that had opened between them. The courtroom's heavy oak doors creaked as Sarah stepped inside. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she made her way to her seat beside her attorney, Jane Wilson. "You ready?" Jane whispered, her kind eyes searching Sarah's face. Sarah nodded, though her trembling hands betrayed her nervousness. The gallery behind her filled quickly with familiar faces, diner regulars, fellow veterans, and townspeople, curious to hear the truth. Carl sat at the opposite table, his smirk replaced by a scowl as he watched more veterans file in, many wearing their service pins. Judge Matthews entered and everyone rose. "Please be seated," he said, his voice steady and clear. "We'll continue with the defense's witnesses." Jane stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call retired Admiral James Kensington to the stand." A distinguished man in his 60s walked forward. His silver hair caught the sunlight, and his bearing commanded immediate respect. After being sworn in, he settled into the witness chair. "Admiral Kensington, could you please explain your relationship to the defendant, Sarah Mitchell?" "I had the honor of overseeing several of Lieutenant Mitchell's missions during her service as a Navy SEAL," he stated firmly. "She was one of our finest operators." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as the Admiral began detailing her service record. Each mission he described stripped away the dark portrait Carl's lawyer had painted of her. "In 2012, Lieutenant Mitchell led a rescue operation in Somalia," Admiral Kensington continued. "Her team extracted 16 civilian aid workers from a hostile situation, not a single casualty on either side. Her tactical decisions saved lives that day." The courtroom listened intently. Sarah noticed several jurors leaning forward, their expressions softening. "And this wasn't an isolated incident," the Admiral added. "Lieutenant Mitchell consistently demonstrated exceptional judgment under pressure. Her priority was always protecting innocent lives." Carl's lawyer stood for cross-examination. "But surely these missions involve violence? Combat?" "Combat was sometimes necessary," Admiral Kensington replied firmly. "But Lieutenant Mitchell's record shows remarkable restraint. She understood that true strength lies in knowing when not to use force." Next, Mr. Wallace took the stand. His weathered face broke into a warm smile as he looked at Sarah. "I recognize Sarah's training that night at the diner because I've seen it before," he testified. "Those weren't the moves of someone looking for trouble. They were the careful, measured actions of someone trained to protect." Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears as more veterans stood to testify. Each one shared stories of her leadership, her compassion, her dedication to protecting others. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted with each testimony, like ice melting under spring sunshine. Finally, Jane called Sarah herself to the stand. As she walked forward, her legs felt weak, but her spine was straight. After being sworn in, she settled into the chair and faced the courtroom. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jane began gently, "could you tell us about that night at the diner?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I was leaving work, heading home to my daughter. When I saw Carl by my car, I tried to avoid confrontation. I asked him politely to move. He refused." Her voice grew stronger. "When he lunged at me, I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself. Nothing more." "And your military training?" "Yes, I was a Navy SEAL," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady now. "But I've never used that training to hurt anyone unnecessarily." "That night, like every mission I served, I did what was needed to prevent harm. Nothing more, nothing less." Carl's lawyer stood. "But you're trained to kill, aren't you, Mrs. Mitchell?" "I'm trained to protect," Sarah corrected him firmly. "Sometimes that meant combat, yes. But more often, it meant finding ways to avoid violence. It meant using just enough force to keep people safe." She looked directly at the jury. "That's exactly what I did that night at the diner. As she spoke, movement at the back of the courtroom caught her eye. Emily had slipped in quietly, standing near the door. Their eyes met across the room, and Sarah's heart swelled at what she saw in her daughter's face. Not fear or doubt, but pride. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jane asked, "why did you leave the Seals?" Sarah's voice softened. "Because I became a mother. My husband had passed away, and Emily needed me. I chose to build a quiet life here, not because I was ashamed of my service, but because I wanted to give my daughter stability." She paused, emotion thick in her throat. "I've never regretted that choice." Looking at Emily again, Sarah saw tears streaming down her daughter's cheeks, but she was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since this whole ordeal began. "No further questions, Your Honor," Jane said. As Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, she felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. The truth was finally out, not as something dark and dangerous, but as what it really was, a testament to protection, service, and love. She caught Emily's eye again as she walked back to her seat. Her daughter stood tall at the back of the courtroom, her eyes shining with pride and understanding. In that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what the verdict might be, she had already won what mattered most, her daughter's trust and admiration. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Matthews adjusted his glasses, studying the documents before him. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her attorney gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. Having reviewed all evidence presented, Judge Matthews began, his voice steady and clear, including witness testimonies, police reports, and character statements. "This court finds Mr. Jenkins' claims to be without merit." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The judge continued, his words measured and deliberate. "The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Mitchell acted in self-defense when confronted by Mr. Jenkins in the diner parking lot. Furthermore, her military service record demonstrates not only her capability, but her consistent dedication to protecting others." Carl Jenkins slumped in his chair, his face red with anger. His attorney shuffled papers nervously, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "The lawsuit is hereby dismissed with prejudice," Judge Matthews declared, bringing down his gavel with a firm crack. "Mrs. Mitchell is fully cleared of all allegations. Court is adjourned." The sound of the gavel had barely faded when cheers erupted from the back of the courtroom. Mr. Wallace and the other veterans stood up, clapping and nodding in approval. The diner staff, who had taken their afternoon off to attend, whistled and cheered. Sheriff Daniels smiled broadly from his seat. Sarah's eyes welled with tears as she turned to thank her attorney. The woman hugged her warmly, whispering, "You deserved this victory." As people began filing out of the courtroom, Sarah noticed Carl storming toward the exit, shouldering past anyone in his way. His attorney hurried after him, calling, "Mr. Jenkins, wait!" But Sarah barely registered them leaving. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found Emily, who stood near the back row. Her daughter's face glowed with pride, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah made her way through the crowd of well-wishers, accepting handshakes and pats on the back. Mr. Wallace caught her in a brief hug, saying, "Never doubted you for a minute, soldier." The diner owner, Mrs. Peterson, grabbed Sarah's hands. "You're getting a raise, honey, and don't even think about arguing." Sheriff Daniels tipped his hat as she passed. "Justice served right today, Sarah. Real proud to have you in our community." But Sarah kept moving toward Emily, who hadn't taken her eyes off her mother. When they finally reached each other in the aisle, Emily's lower lip trembled. They stepped out of the courthouse together, into the bright afternoon sunlight. Other people spilled out behind them, still talking excitedly about the verdict. Emily suddenly spun around to face her mother. Her eyes shone with a mix of tears and joy as she threw her arms around Sarah. "That's my mom!" Emily cried out, hugging Sarah fiercely. The words echoed across the courthouse steps, making several people turn and smile. Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. The relief washing over her felt like a physical wave, carrying away months of worry and fear. She buried her face in Emily's hair, letting her own tears fall freely. They stood there on the courthouse steps, mother and daughter, their embrace saying everything words couldn't. The truth about Sarah's past no longer felt like a shadow between them, but a bridge bringing them closer together. Sarah felt Emily's tears soaking into her blouse, felt her daughter's shoulders shaking with emotion. The moment stretched out, precious and perfect, as the afternoon sun warmed their backs and the last of the courthouse crowd dispersed around them. The digital clock on Sarah's nightstand blinked 2, 8:47 a.m., when a faint crackling sound stirred her from sleep. Her military-trained senses snapped to attention before her eyes fully opened. Something wasn't right. The air felt thick, and an acrid smell tickled her nostrils. Smoke. Sarah bolted upright, her heart pounding. Gray wisps were seeping under her bedroom door, curling up like ghostly fingers in the darkness. The smoke detector suddenly blared its sharp warning, making her jump despite her training. "Emily!" Sarah threw off her covers and rushed to the door. The metal doorknob was warm to the touch. Not hot, but warming quickly. She yanked it open, and a wall of smoke rushed in, making her eyes water instantly. The hallway was filling rapidly with dark smoke. Orange flames flickered at the far end, near the stairs, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The heat was already intense, making her skin prickle. "Emily!" Sarah called again, covering her mouth with her sleeve as she rushed to her daughter's room. "Emily, wake up!" She burst through Emily's door to find her daughter stirring groggily, confused by the noise. "Mom, what's happening?" "Fire! We need to get out now!" Sarah's voice was firm but controlled, fighting back her own panic. She grabbed Emily's arm, helping her out of bed. "Stay low. Cover your mouth with your shirt." Emily's eyes went wide with fear as she saw the smoke pouring in. "Mom!" "Don't talk, just move." Sarah guided Emily down to a crouch. The smoke was thicker now, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of wood cracking somewhere below. They crawled toward the hallway, staying as close to the floor as possible where the air was clearest. Sarah's military training kicked in fully. Assess, adapt, act. The stairs were no longer an option. Flames were now clearly visible at the bottom. "Window," Sarah commanded, pulling Emily back toward her bedroom. "We need to go out the window." Emily was shaking but following her mother's lead. Sarah's room had a large oak tree near the window, its branches reaching close to the house. She'd always meant to trim them back, worried they could give someone access to the second floor. Now, those branches might save their lives. The smoke was getting thicker by the second. Sarah could hear the fire roaring downstairs, consuming their home with frightening speed. She forced her window open, the cool night air rushing in like a blessing. "I'll go first," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Then I'll help you across." She swung one leg out the window, finding purchase on the wide branch. The rough bark bit into her bare feet, but she barely noticed. A loud crash from downstairs made Emily scream. "Mom!" "Focus on me," Sarah commanded, now fully on the branch. "Come on, honey." Just like we practiced climbing trees at the park. She reached out her hand, trying to keep her voice calm despite the urgency thundering in her chest. Emily hesitated at the window, tears streaming down her smoke-stained face. The flames were visible in the hallway now, casting everything in a hellish orange glow. "Trust me, Emily. I've got you." Emily nodded and climbed onto the windowsill. She reached for Sarah's hand, trembling but determined. Sarah's grip was firm and sure as she guided her daughter onto the branch. "That's it. Just a few more feet," Sarah encouraged as they slowly made their way along the branch. The bark was rough against their bare feet, but neither of them felt the scrapes and cuts in that moment of pure survival. They were only halfway down the tree when another crash echoed from inside the house. The entire structure groaned ominously. Sarah could feel the heat of the flames even from outside now. "Jump," Sarah ordered when they reached a lower branch. She went first, landing hard on the dewy grass, then held up her arms. "Jump, Emily. I'll catch you." Emily leaped without hesitation this time, falling into her mother's arms. They stumbled backward together, then scrambled further away from the burning house. Only then did they turn to watch their home being devoured by flames. The fire had spread with unnatural speed. Orange flames burst through windows, licking up the sides of the house like hungry demons. The heat was intense even from where they stood, forcing them to back up further across their front lawn. Neighbors were emerging from their homes now, some already on phones calling 911. Others rushed over with blankets, wrapping them around Sarah and Emily's shoulders. The night air was cold against their smoke-heated skin, making them shiver despite the inferno before them. Sarah held Emily close, both of them watching in shocked silence as their lives went up in flames. The roof began to cave in with a thunderous roar, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Everything they owned, every photograph, every memory, every piece of furniture, all of it was being reduced to ash before their eyes. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the crackling of the flames. Red and blue lights began to flash against the neighboring houses. But Sarah knew it was too late to save their home. The structure was already compromised. Walls buckling under the intense heat. Emily buried her face in Sarah's shoulder, sobbing quietly. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, her own tears falling silently. They stood barefoot on their front lawn, covered in soot, wrapped in borrowed blankets, as their home collapsed in on itself with a final, devastating crash. The wailing sirens grew louder as fire trucks rounded the corner, but Sarah barely heard them. All she could focus on was the warmth of Emily in her arms, alive and safe, as everything else they owned turned to ash in the pre-dawn darkness. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Pine Grove Motel, where Sarah and Emily had spent what remained of the night. Sarah sat on a plastic chair outside their room, clutching a paper cup of lukewarm coffee from the vending machine. Her eyes burned from smoke and lack of sleep. But she couldn't rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flames consuming their home. Sheriff Daniels' cruiser pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under his tires. He stepped out, his face grim but determined. Sarah straightened in her chair as he approached. "How's Emily?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Finally sleeping," Sarah replied, glancing at the closed motel room door. "What did you find?" The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "The fire investigators found accelerant traces around the foundation. This wasn't an accident, Sarah." And given the timing, he let the words hang in the air. "Carl Jenkins," Sarah said flatly. "He's our prime suspect. Problem is, he's cleared out of his usual haunts. But we'll find him." Sheriff Daniels' jaw tightened. "Every officer in 3 counties is looking." Sarah nodded, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup until it crumpled slightly. "Everything we owned was in that house. Emily's photos, her childhood drawings." Her voice caught. "All gone." "The community's already rallying," Sheriff Daniels said. "Betty from the diner called me this morning. She and her husband have a trailer they use for hunting season. It's small, but it's yours for as long as you need it." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I can't accept—" "Yes, you can," the sheriff cut in firmly. "Let people help, Sarah. You're not alone in this fight anymore." The motel door creaked open, and Emily emerged, her dark hair tangled from fitful sleep. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she wore borrowed clothes from the emergency supplies they'd been given. "Morning, Emily," Sheriff Daniels said kindly. "How are you holding up?" Emily shrugged, moving to stand close to her mother. Sarah reached out and squeezed her hand. "I've got some news that might help," the sheriff continued. "We've got a place for you two to stay while we sort this out. It's not fancy, but it's private and safe." An hour later, they followed Betty's pickup truck down a winding dirt road on the outskirts of town. The trailer sat in a clearing, surrounded by tall pines. It was weather-beaten but solid, with a small wooden deck out front. Betty, still in her diner uniform, unlocked the door with shaking hands. "It's not much," she apologized. "But the heat works, and the water's clean." She led them inside. The interior was cramped but clean. A kitchenette occupied one end, with a fold-out table against the wall. A narrow hallway led to a bathroom and a single bedroom. The furniture was worn but comfortable-looking, with handmade quilts draped over the seats. "The bed's big enough for 2 if you squeeze," Betty said, wringing her hands. "And the couch pulls out if you prefer. I put fresh sheets on everything this morning." Sarah touched Betty's arm, stopping her nervous chatter. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." Betty's eyes welled up. "You just stay as long as you need. And don't worry about work. Your shifts are covered, but your job's waiting whenever you're ready." After Betty left, Sarah and Emily stood in the small living space, surrounded by the few possessions they'd managed to save. Emily's school backpack, Sarah's wallet and keys, and a box of donated necessities from the Red Cross. Emily ran her hand along the wooden counter. "It's like camping," she said, trying to sound upbeat despite her trembling voice. Sarah watched her daughter, noting the brave front she was putting on. "We'll make it work," she promised. "It's just temporary." They spent the afternoon organizing their meager belongings and accepting deliveries from townspeople, groceries, clothes, basic toiletries. Each act of kindness threatened to overwhelm Sarah, who was used to handling crises alone. As night fell, the trailer grew chilly despite the heating. They huddled together on the small bed, sharing one of Betty's quilts. The woods around them were alive with unfamiliar sounds. Crickets chirping, branches creaking, the occasional hoot of an owl. Emily shifted closer to Sarah in the darkness.
Mom?
She whispered. Yes, sweetheart? I'm scared. Emily's voice was small, vulnerable in a way that made Sarah's heart ache. Not just about the fire. About everything. What if he comes back? What if... He won't get near us again, Sarah said firmly, wrapping her arm tighter around her daughter. I promise you that.
But what if something happens to you?
Emily pressed closer.
Everyone else I love is gone. Dad, our home, everything. Don't leave me, Mom.
Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks in the darkness. She thought of all the missions she'd survived, all the time she'd fought to make it home. None of those battles had felt as crucial as this moment, holding her frightened daughter in a borrowed bed. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered fiercely. Looking up at the trailer's ceiling, Sarah made a silent vow to whatever power was listening. She would not fail her daughter. Not now. Not ever. Emily's breathing gradually steadied as she drifted off to sleep, but Sarah remained awake, keeping watch in the unfamiliar darkness, her protective instincts on high alert. Her daughter's words echoed in her mind. Don't leave me, Mom. The weight of that trust, that need, settled over her like a mantle. She would carry it gladly, no matter what came next. The borrowed trailer sat at the edge of town, nestled between two towering oak trees. Their branches swayed gently in the early morning breeze, casting shifting shadows across the metal steps where Sarah Mitchell sat alone. The first hints of sunrise painted the sky in soft pinks and purples, but she barely noticed the beauty through her tears. For the first time since leaving the Seals, since becoming a single mother, since vowing to be strong for Emily, Sarah let herself break down. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs as she pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to muffle the sound. The tears felt foreign on her cheeks. She hadn't cried in years, not even at her husband's funeral. She'd always been the strong one, the protector, the foundation that others could lean on. The trailer's thin walls and cramped spaces were a far cry from the home they'd built. Their home, now nothing but ashes and charred timber. Sarah could still smell smoke in her hair, could still feel the heat of the flames on her face as she'd rushed Emily to safety. Everything they owned, every photo album, every piece of furniture, every treasured memento, gone in a single night of senseless violence. The morning dew soaked through her borrowed sweatpants where she sat on the cold metal step. Her coffee cup sat forgotten beside her, growing cold in the dawn air. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly as waves of guilt and grief washed over her. I should have known, she whispered to the empty yard. I should have protected us better. Her past, the very skills that had saved them both, had also painted a target on their backs. Carl's revenge had cost them everything. The life she'd carefully built for Emily, the normal childhood she'd fought so hard to provide, had gone up in flames because Sarah couldn't truly escape who she was. A memory surfaced. Emily at age 5, proudly showing off the butterfly garden they'd planted together, the rose bushes along the front walk that Sarah had tenderly cultivated each spring, the window seat where Emily did her homework, bathed in afternoon sunlight. All of it gone. Sarah's throat tightened as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Her training had taught her to compartmentalize, to push through pain and keep moving forward. But here, in the growing light of dawn, those carefully constructed walls crumbled. She was more than a former SEAL, more than a fighter. She was a mother who had failed to keep her child safe. The sound of the trailer's screen door creaking open barely registered through Sarah's grief. Soft footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then more certain. A warm presence settled beside her on the step, and gentle arms wrapped around her shoulders. Emily pulled her mother close, saying nothing, simply holding on as Sarah's tears fell. The gesture, so like her daughter, so full of quiet strength, only made Sarah cry harder. She turned and buried her face in Emily's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, one of the few things they'd managed to grab before fleeing the fire. The borrowed trailer's tiny kitchen felt even smaller in the heavy morning silence. Sarah stood at the cramped counter, mechanically stirring instant coffee into 2 chipped mugs she'd salvaged from their burned house. The bitter aroma couldn't mask the lingering smell of smoke that clung to their few rescued belongings. Emily sat at the fold-down table, pushing dry cereal around in her bowl. Her dark hair was still messy from sleep, and she wore one of the oversized t-shirts donated by the diner staff. The morning light streaming through the trailer's dusty window made her look younger than her 15 years. Sarah placed both mugs on the table and slowly sank into the seat across from her daughter. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around the warm ceramic. It was time. "Emily," she began softly, "I need to tell you everything. The whole truth. No more hiding." Emily's spoon clattered against the bowl as she looked up, her eyes wide and uncertain. "About being a SEAL?" Sarah nodded. "About all of it. Why I joined, what I did, and why I left." She took a deep breath. "But I need you to understand something first. Everything I'm about to tell you I did to protect people, to save lives. Even when you—" Emily hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "Killed people?" Sarah's heart clenched, but she forced herself to meet her daughter's gaze. "Yes. Sometimes protecting meant making impossible choices, but I never took a life unless it was absolutely necessary to save others." She told Emily about joining the Navy after college, driven by a desire to make a difference, about the grueling training that pushed her beyond what she thought possible, about being one of the first women selected for SEAL training, and the pride mixed with terror when she made it through. "My first mission," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the old memory surfacing, "was rescuing aid workers from terrorists. They were doctors and nurses who'd been kidnapped while helping children in a war zone." She described the tense night operation, the precise teamwork, the moment they found the hostages alive. Emily leaned forward, her breakfast forgotten. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "But more scared of failing those innocent people than anything else." She shared more missions, protecting refugees, stopping weapons smugglers, gathering intelligence that saved countless lives. But she didn't shy away from the darker moments either. The weight of taking lives to save others, the nightmares that still haunted her, the cost of violence, even when justified. "The hardest part wasn't the danger," Sarah explained, her coffee now cold and untouched. "It was carrying the responsibility of those decisions, knowing that every choice meant life or death for someone." Emily's eyes glistened. "Is that why you left? Because it was too hard?" Sarah shook her head. "I left because of you, sweetheart." She reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "When your father died and I found out I was pregnant with you, everything changed. I realized I couldn't risk leaving you an orphan, but more than that, I wanted to give you a peaceful life, far from violence and war." "So you became a waitress instead of a hero?" Emily's voice held a mix of confusion and something else, understanding perhaps. "I'm still the same person," Sarah said softly. "Being a SEAL taught me discipline, courage, and how to protect others. I use those skills every day, just differently now. When I serve coffee to lonely elderly customers who need someone to talk to, when I stand up to bullies like Carl, when I work extra shifts to give you a better life." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks. "But you gave up so much. Your whole career, your identity." "I gained more than I lost," Sarah insisted, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Being your mom is the most important mission I've ever had. Every day, I choose peace over violence, love over fear. That takes just as much courage as any combat mission." Emily was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd heard. Sarah held her breath, terrified of her daughter's judgment, of seeing disgust or fear in those familiar eyes. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice thick with emotion but clear and strong. "You didn't just fight wars, Mom. You fought for me." The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the county. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder in the stuffy space, faces both familiar and strange turned toward the podium where Sheriff Daniels stood, his weathered hands gripping the edges. Sarah and Emily sat near the back, partly hidden in shadow, but they could still feel the occasional glances cast their way. "What happened to the Mitchell family wasn't just a crime against them," Sheriff Daniels began, his deep voice carrying to every corner. "It was an attack on everything we stand for in this community." He paused, scanning the crowd. "When someone burns down a home, they're trying to destroy more than walls and furniture. They're trying to break spirits. Sarah felt Emily's hand slip into hers, squeezing tight. The girl's other hand clutched the sleeve of her borrowed sweater, 3 sizes too big, but the best they could find in the donation box. "But that's not who we are," the sheriff continued, his voice growing stronger. "In this town, we take care of our own. We stand together against bullies and cowards who attack in the night." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mr. Wallace, sitting in his wheelchair in the front row, raised his fist in solidarity. Several other veterans nodded firmly. "I've set up a donation center at the fire station," Sheriff Daniels announced. "We need furniture, clothes, household items, anything you can spare." The Mitchells lost everything but what they were wearing. His eyes found Sarah's in the crowd. "And I know some of you have questions about Sarah's past. Well, let me tell you something about that past. It's a past of service, of sacrifice, of protecting others. The same qualities we saw when she defended herself at the diner." Sarah's throat tightened. Emily pressed closer to her side. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the local quilting circle, stood up. "I've already started a blanket drive," she announced. "And my husband's furniture store will donate a bedroom set." More people began standing, calling out offers. "I've got a spare couch. My brother's a contractor. We'll help rebuild. The church youth group can pack boxes." The diner owner, Betty, pushed through the crowd to reach Sarah, pressing an envelope into her hands. "Tips from the whole staff," she whispered. "Don't you dare try to refuse." Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she looked inside. There had to be several $100s there. "Betty, I can't." "You can and you will," Betty cut her off firmly. "We're family." The meeting transformed into an impromptu organizing session. People clustered in groups, making lists, exchanging phone numbers, coordinating delivery times. Sarah watched in stunned silence as her neighbors, some she barely knew, planned the rebuilding of her life with the precision of a military operation. Mrs. Peterson from the library approached with a box of books. "Emily mentioned these were her favorites," she said softly. "I kept copies aside just for her." Emily's eyes lit up as she recognized the familiar titles. "Thank you," she whispered, running her fingers over the spines. Mr. Wallace wheeled over, a group of veterans following behind him. "We've got a construction crew ready," he said gruffly. "Just need the permits to clear. These boys know their way around a hammer." One by one, people approached with offers, support, and simple words of encouragement. Each gesture, no matter how small, felt like a stone being laid in a new foundation, not just for a house, but for belonging. Sheriff Daniels made his way through the crowd to stand beside Sarah. "Carl's in custody," he said quietly. "Multiple witnesses saw him near your house that night. He's not getting away with this." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The sheriff squeezed her shoulder gently. "Mom, look," Emily called, excitement breaking through her usual reserve. She pointed to where several of her classmates were organizing a clothing drive, sorting through bags of donated items. "Jenny says her mom's whole book club is bringing meals next week." The town hall buzzed with energy and purpose. Lists circulated, sign-up sheets filled, and plans took shape. Someone had drawn up a rough construction timeline on the whiteboard. Another group huddled around laptops, setting up an online donation page. Sarah stood in the midst of it all, overwhelmed by the surge of support washing over her. This was so different from the military, where unity came from shared mission and training. This was something raw, more organic, a community choosing to lift up its own. Emily tugged at her sleeve, eyes shining. "Did you see? Mrs. Rodriguez is bringing her famous enchiladas tomorrow, and Mr. Chen from the hardware store is donating all the paint we want." Sarah pulled her daughter close, pressing a kiss to her hair. Around them, the buzz of activity continued. People calling out offers, making plans, coordinating schedules. The fear and isolation of the past few days began to crack and crumble under the weight of so much love. "I thought I'd lost everything," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she surveyed the room full of neighbors turned family. "But look at this love." Sheriff Daniels strode into the crowded town hall, his face bearing a mix of weariness and satisfaction. The buzz of conversation died down as he made his way to where Sarah and Emily sat. His boots echoed against the wooden floor, and the overhead fans whirred steadily in the background. "We got him," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Carl Jenkins was picked up trying to cross the county line. Found gas cans in his trunk and burns on his hands. He's not going anywhere for a long time." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the gathered crowd. Sarah felt Emily's hand squeeze hers tightly, and she pulled her daughter closer. The weight that had been pressing on her chest since the fire began to lift. Mr. Wallace, who had been organizing donations at a folding table near the wall, approached them with a gentle smile. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," he said, his military bearing still evident in his straight posture. "Now we can focus on getting you folks back on your feet." The diner staff had already set up several tables laden with clothes, blankets, and household items. Mary, Sarah's colleague from the evening shift, waved them over. Her round face beamed as she held up a box of kitchen supplies. "These are from my sister's store. Brand new pots and pans. You'll need them once we get you settled." Emily's eyes widened at the growing collection of donations. She wandered over to the tables, running her fingers along neatly folded towels and stacks of plates. Sarah watched as her daughter's shoulders relaxed, the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to fade. "The construction crew's ready to start whenever you give the word," Sheriff Daniels said, his voice softer now. "Tommy's boys volunteered their labor. We just need to cover materials." Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Peterson from the bank stepped forward. "We've set up a community fund," she announced, holding up a thick envelope. "The whole town's been contributing. It's not everything you'll need, but it's a solid start." Sarah's throat tightened. She'd spent so many years keeping people at arm's length, protecting her secrets, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something bigger than herself. The generosity overwhelmed her. "I don't know what to say," she managed, her voice rough with emotion. "Then don't say anything," Mary replied, pressing a box of toiletries into her hands. "Just let us help. That's what community's for." Emily had begun helping to organize the donations, working alongside other volunteers. She sorted through clothing with careful attention, creating neat piles by size and type. Sarah noticed how the teenager's usual self-consciousness had disappeared, replaced by purposeful focus. The town hall hummed with activity as more people arrived, bringing additional supplies. Children darted between the tables, carrying smaller items to where they were needed. The atmosphere felt almost festive, like a barn raising from days gone by. "Mom!" Emily called out, holding up a familiar-looking quilt. "Mrs. Johnson brought this. It's just like the one we had." Her eyes shone with genuine excitement, perhaps the first Sarah had seen since the fire. Sarah walked over to examine the quilt, its pattern reminiscent of the one that had been lost. Mrs. Johnson, a retired school teacher, patted her arm. "I made this one last winter," she explained. "It was waiting for the right home." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found herself surrounded by snippets of conversation and genuine care. The veterans group had set up a corner where they discussed reconstruction plans. The diner staff coordinated meal deliveries for the coming weeks. Even the local hardware store owner was there, clipboard in hand, calculating material costs. Emily moved through it all with growing confidence, accepting hugs from neighbors and thank yous from her mother's friends. She helped sort through boxes of books, setting aside one she recognized from their old collection and discovering new titles to replace those lost. Sarah watched her daughter stack canned goods with careful precision, noting how she smiled at each person who brought more donations. The girl who had once questioned her mother's past was now standing tall, proud to be part of this effort to rebuild their lives. A peaceful feeling settled over Sarah as she observed the scene. The military had taught her about unit cohesion and having each other's backs, but this was different. This was about belonging, about being accepted not despite her past, but with it fully known and understood. Emily caught her mother's eye across the room and smiled, a real, uninhibited smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She held up a box of her favorite cereal that someone had brought, and Sarah felt her heart swell with gratitude. The afternoon light slanted through the town hall's high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Emily continued her methodical work, now helping to stack boxes of donated supplies against the wall. Her movements were sure and steady, her face serene. She had found her place in this tapestry of community support, and Sarah realized that perhaps they both had. The peace that settled in Sarah's heart wasn't just about Carl's arrest or the generous donations. It was about watching her daughter bloom in the warmth of their neighbors' love, about feeling the walls she'd built around herself crumble in the face of such genuine kindness. The morning sun cast long shadows across the burned remains of Sarah's home as pickup trucks rolled into the driveway one by one. Mr. Wallace's old Ford was first, its bed loaded with lumber and tools. He stepped out, adjusting his veteran's cap, and gave Sarah a firm nod. "Ready to raise some walls?" he asked, his weathered face breaking into a smile. More vehicles arrived, bringing a steady stream of volunteers. The diner staff came bearing boxes of donuts and thermoses of hot coffee. Church members showed up with work gloves and determined expressions. Local teenagers, some of whom Sarah recognized from Emily's school, piled out of their parents' cars. Sarah stood at the edge of the scorched foundation, her throat tight with emotion. Emily squeezed her hand.
"Look at all these people, Mom."
The sheriff's deputy had already cleared the site for rebuilding, and the insurance company had processed their claim with unusual speed, thanks, Sarah suspected, to some gentle pressure from Sheriff Daniels. Now, watching the volunteers organize themselves into work crews, she felt overwhelmed by the community's response. Mr. Wallace took charge naturally, his military training showing in how he coordinated the groups. "Martinez, you and your crew start clearing that debris. Pastor Jim, your team can begin framing once we've got a clean foundation. Remember, folks, safety first." The sounds of work filled the air, shovels scraping, hammers pounding, voices calling back and forth. The acrid smell of burnt wood gradually gave way to the fresh scent of sawdust and new lumber. Emily joined a group of her classmates, wearing work gloves too big for her hands, helping to sort salvageable items from the ruins. Sarah worked alongside her diner regulars, moving burned timbers and clearing space for the new construction. Jenny, her fellow waitress, bumped her shoulder playfully. "You know, I always wanted to learn construction." The veterans worked with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized from years of working as a team. They showed the younger volunteers how to measure twice and cut once, how to level a beam, how to work safely with power tools. Sarah watched as Mr. Wallace patiently demonstrated proper hammer technique to a teenager who'd never held one before. By mid-morning, the foundation was clear, and the framing began to take shape. The sound of nail guns punctuated the steady rhythm of hammers. Someone had set up a radio, and country music drifted across the site, mixing with laughter and conversation. During a water break, Sarah overheard two elderly church ladies talking. "Just look at those young people working so hard," one said. "And those veterans, such dear men." "That's what community means," the other replied. "When one hurts, we all pitch in." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, remembering how different things had been just weeks ago, when whispers and suspicious glances had followed her through town. Now, these same people were here, giving their Saturday to help rebuild her home. Emily appeared at her side, face smudged with dirt but beaming. "Mom, come see what we found!" She led Sarah to a small pile of recovered items, a slightly scorched photo album, a ceramic mug that had somehow survived, her old Navy photograph in its metal frame. "Your grandfather gave me that frame," Sarah said softly, touching the tarnished edge. "Said nothing could destroy it." "Just like nothing could destroy you," Emily replied, hugging her mother quickly before running back to help her friends. The work continued through the afternoon. Someone fired up a grill, and the smell of hamburgers drew workers in shifts to eat and rest. Sarah watched as Mr. Wallace sat with a group of teenagers, sharing stories that had them alternately laughing and listening in rapt attention. The diner owner arrived with his wife, bringing more supplies and hot food. "Can't let my best waitress live in a trailer forever," he said with a wink at Sarah. Who else would keep the coffee flowing just right? As the sun began to dip lower, the basic framework of the house stood outlined against the sky. It wasn't much yet, just wooden bones reaching upward, but it was more than Sarah had dared to hope for that morning. She stood back, taking it all in, the veterans teaching skills to eager learners, the teenagers working alongside retirees, the women organizing supplies and food, all of them coming together to help rebuild not just a house, but a home. Mr. Wallace approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good day's work," he said simply. "We'll be back tomorrow, and the next day, until it's done." Sarah looked at the framework of her new house, feeling her heart swell with gratitude. The structure before her represented more than just walls and a roof. It was physical proof of the community's acceptance and support, a testament to the power of forgiveness and understanding. Emily joined her, slipping her hand into Sarah's as they stood together, watching the volunteers pack up for the day. The frame of their new home rose against the evening sky, a promise of new beginnings built on the foundation of community love and support. "You know what, Mom?" Emily said softly. I think this house is going to be even better than the old one. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, as she gazed at the framework that would soon become their new home. The simple wooden beam stood as a powerful symbol of hope, renewal, and the incredible strength of a community coming together to support one of their own. The tiny trailer creaked as Sarah stepped inside, shaking off the evening chill. The smell of microwave mac and cheese lingered in the air, their temporary home's signature scent. She paused at the sight of Emily hunched over her laptop at the fold-out kitchen table, fingers flying across the keyboard with intense focus. Hey, sweetie, Sarah said softly, not wanting to break her daughter's concentration. How was school? Emily jumped slightly, then relaxed when she saw it was just her mom. A hint of pink colored her cheeks as she quickly minimized the document on her screen. Oh, hi, Mom. School was actually pretty good today. Sarah slipped off her work shoes and padded over to the mini-fridge, grabbing a bottle of water. She noticed Emily's unusual nervousness, the way her daughter's fingers drummed against the table edge, how she kept glancing between Sarah and the laptop screen. Everything okay? Sarah asked, leaning against the counter. You seem a little jumpy. Emily took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling. Yeah, She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a habit she'd had since kindergarten when she was working up the courage to say something important. I've been working on something, for school, and I think I want you to read it. Sarah's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Emily had always been private about her writing, especially lately. Of course, honey. I'd love to. Emily's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she maximized the document again. She scooted her chair over, making room for Sarah to sit beside her. It's for Mrs. Henderson's class. We had to write about someone who inspires us. Sarah settled into the chair, her heart already picking up speed. The document's title made her breath catch. My Hero, My Mom, by Emily Mitchell. Oh, Emily, Sarah whispered. Just read it, okay? Emily said, her voice small but determined. And be honest about what you think. Sarah began to read, her eyes moving across the screen as Emily's words painted their story. Heroes don't always wear capes or fly through the sky. Sometimes they wear waitress uniforms and make the best chocolate chip pancakes in the world. Sometimes they tuck you in at night even when they're exhausted from working double shifts. Sometimes they carry scars you can't see and strength you never knew about until the world forces them to show it. My mom is that kind of hero. For most of my life, I thought I knew everything about her. She was just my mom, the one who checked my homework, who taught me to ride a bike, who held me when Dad died even though she was hurting too. But this year, I learned there was so much more to her story. My mom used to be a Navy SEAL. When people hear that now, they sometimes get scared or weird about it, but they don't understand what it really means. It means that before I was born, my mom was brave enough to do what most people couldn't. She fought to protect people who needed help. She went through training that would make most of us quit on day one. She learned to be strong not just for herself, but for others. Some people tried to use that part of her life against her. They tried to make it sound scary or wrong. But they don't know her like I do. They don't see how she uses that same strength today, not to fight battles, but to make our world better in small ways that add up to something huge. When bad things happened to us recently, I watched my mom stand tall. She didn't give up or run away. She showed me that being strong doesn't mean you never feel afraid. It means you keep going anyway. She taught me that family isn't just about blood or being perfect. It's about love that stays, even when things get hard. The thing about real heroes is that they don't try to be heroes at all. They just do what's right, even when it's hard. They protect people, even when it costs them something. They love, without conditions. My mom doesn't wear a uniform anymore. She wears comfortable shoes for long shifts at the diner. Her weapons aren't guns or knives, they're kindness and determination. Her missions aren't secret operations. They're making sure I feel safe and loved every single day. Some people write about fictional characters as their heroes. Some pick famous athletes or movie stars. But I pick my mom because she showed me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That it's okay to be both strong and gentle. That our past doesn't define us, it prepares us for who we're meant to become. I used to wonder why she kept her military service a secret for so long. Now I understand. She wanted me to know her first as Mom, to build our relationship on love instead of legends. But learning about her past didn't change who she is to me. It just helped me understand her better. It helped me see that heroes don't have to be perfect. They just have to be real. My mom is my hero not because she was a SEAL, but because she's Sarah Mitchell. Because she faces each day with courage, whether she's defending herself from danger or just making sure I eat a good breakfast. Because she taught me that love is the greatest strength of all. I'm proud to be her daughter. I'm proud of who she was, who she is, and who she's helping me become. That's what real heroes do. They don't just save the day. They save the people they love, one small moment at a time. Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she finished reading. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the depth of understanding and love in her daughter's words. All the fear and doubt she'd carried about how her past would affect Emily seemed to melt away. Emily watched her anxiously. Is it okay? I know it's kind of personal, but Sarah turned and pulled Emily into her arms, holding her close as tears streamed down her face. You're my hero too, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You're my hero too. Golden sunlight bathed the town square as chairs filled with familiar faces. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the hastily constructed stage, fluttering in the gentle breeze. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, smoothing her navy blazer for the 100th time. Her stomach churned at the thought of speaking in front of everyone. Stop fidgeting, Mom, Emily whispered, squeezing her hand. You look perfect. Mr. Wallace, wearing his old service medals, took the podium first. His weathered face broke into a warm smile as he addressed the crowd. Welcome to our first annual Heroes Day. Today, we honor not just those who served in uniform, but all the everyday heroes who make our community strong. Sarah's eyes swept across the gathering. The diner staff sat together, wearing matching t-shirts with Mitchell's Mighty Squad printed on them. Sheriff Daniels stood at attention near the back, his badge gleaming. Construction workers who'd helped rebuild her house dotted the crowd, their worn work boots replaced with Sunday shoes. Mayor Thompson stepped up next. This celebration was inspired by someone special, she began. Someone who reminded us that true courage isn't about fighting. It's about protecting what matters most. She gestured toward Sarah. Sarah Mitchell, would you please join me? Emily gave her mother a gentle push. Go on, Mom. You've got this. Sarah's legs felt wooden as she climbed the steps. The microphone loomed before her like an old enemy. She gripped the podium edges, took a deep breath, and looked out at the sea of supportive faces. I'm not good at speeches, she began, her voice wavering slightly. For years, I tried to hide who I was. I thought my past would hurt the people I love. She caught Emily's eye in the front row. But this community taught me something powerful about courage. The wind rustled through nearby trees as Sarah continued. Real courage isn't what I learned in the military. It's what I see right here, in neighbors, helping neighbors. In people who stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. In a town that rebuilds what hatred tries to destroy. Mr. Wallace nodded encouragingly as Sarah's voice grew stronger. When my house burned down, I thought I'd lost everything. But you all showed me that home isn't just four walls. It's the hearts of the people around you. She gestured to the diner staff. It's the co-workers who become family. To the construction crew. The strangers who become friends. To Sheriff Daniels. The protectors who keep us safe. Finally to Emily. And the love that never gives up on you, even when you've given up on yourself. Tears glistened in many eyes as Sarah spoke. Some of you asked why I left the SEALs. The truth is, I chose love over war. I chose to build rather than destroy. And standing here today, seeing all of you, I know that was the right choice. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. My daughter wrote something in her essay that changed how I see myself. She said, a hero isn't someone who never feels afraid. A hero is someone who faces their fears to help others. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. That's what I see in this town. Heroes everywhere, facing their fears, helping others, choosing love over hate. The mayor stepped forward with a plaque, but Sarah raised her hand. This honor belongs to all of us. To the veterans who served, to the first responders who protect us, to the teachers who guide our children, to every person who shows up when their neighbor needs help. She looked at the rebuilt house visible just beyond the square. When I came to this town, I was running from my past. Now I know sometimes what we run from becomes the very thing that helps us save others. Faith brought me here. Love kept me here. And this community showed me that every chapter of our story matters. The crowd rose to their feet as Sarah stepped back from the podium. Emily's face shone with pride as she clapped harder than anyone, tears streaming down her cheeks. The sound of applause rolled across the square like thunder. The mayor presented Sarah with the plaque for outstanding service and courage. But Sarah immediately motioned Emily to join her on stage. Mother and daughter stood together, arms around each other, as more awards were presented to other local heroes, firefighters, teachers, volunteers. Mr. Wallace came forward last, his medals catching the sun. Heroes Day isn't about celebrating war, he said gruffly. It's about celebrating the courage to choose peace, the strength to choose love, the wisdom to know that sometimes the greatest battles are won with an open heart. Sarah looked down at Emily, who beamed up at her with pure adoration. The applause continued, but Sarah barely heard it. In her daughter's eyes, she saw something better than any medal or award. She saw acceptance, understanding, and most importantly, love. The breeze carried the sweet scent of late summer flowers as the ceremony continued. Sarah Mitchell stood tall, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. She was exactly where she needed to be, surrounded by her true family, her real home, and the daughter who had helped her become the hero she was always meant to be. From the front row, Emily's clapping never wavered, her smile brighter than the August sun. The sound of her enthusiasm rose above the crowd, a daughter's pride echoing across the town square. The late summer breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and newly cut grass as Sarah Mitchell stood in her rebuilt front yard. The house gleamed white in the afternoon sun, its wraparound porch adorned with hanging baskets of purple petunias, Emily's choice. Neighbors streamed up the driveway carrying covered dishes and housewarming gifts, their chatter filling the air with warmth and belonging. "Mrs. Mitchell, these cheese straws are from my mama's recipe," called Betty from the diner, balancing a tray of golden pastries. "She always said a house ain't a home without something fresh from the oven." Sarah accepted the tray with a grateful smile, remembering those long nights at the diner that felt like a lifetime ago. Now the same customers who had witnessed her darkest moment were here celebrating her triumph. Emily darted between guests, proudly giving tours of their new home. "Come see my room," she called to her friends. "Mom, let me pick the colors." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah's heart swelled watching her daughter so at ease, so far from the confused and frightened girl she'd been just months ago. Mr. Wallace arrived with his wife, carrying a carefully wrapped package. "This is something special," he said, pressing it into Sarah's hands. "Open it now." Sarah carefully peeled back the paper to reveal a shadow box containing a folded American flag. Her breath caught as she traced the wooden frame with trembling fingers. "It's not just for your service," Mr. Wallace explained softly. "It's for showing us all what real courage looks like, the kind that builds instead of destroys." Sheriff Daniels stood nearby, sipping lemonade and chatting with other guests. He caught Sarah's eye and raised his glass in a subtle salute. They both knew Carl wouldn't trouble anyone again for a long time, but the sheriff's steady presence still brought comfort. The house itself was different from the original, better in many ways. The community had pitched in not just money but skills and time. The carpenter who'd built the new kitchen cabinets was currently explaining their special features to a group of admiring neighbors. The local quilting circle had crafted beautiful blankets for both Sarah and Emily's beds. Even the garden had been replanted by the garden club, ensuring year-round blooms. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found a quiet moment to slip inside. She stood in the living room, taking in the space that was both familiar and new. Photos lined the walls, not just of her and Emily, but new ones too. The town's first Heroes Day celebration, the building crew raising the first wall of their new home, Emily surrounded by her friends at a surprise birthday party the diner staff had thrown for her. "Mom?" Emily appeared beside her, holding 2 plates of food. "You should eat something. You've been taking care of everyone else all day." Sarah accepted the plate, noting how her daughter had remembered all her favorites. They sat together on the new couch, their shoulders touching. "It's really ours again, isn't it?" Emily said softly. "But different this time. Better." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Through the window, she could see their neighbors mingling in the yard, children playing tag around the old oak tree that had somehow survived the fire. "You know what's weird?" Emily continued, picking at her food thoughtfully. "I used to think we needed to keep secrets to be safe, but it turns out being honest made us stronger." Sarah wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders, remembering those painful conversations in the borrowed trailer, the tears, the fears, the gradual understanding that had bloomed between them. "I think you taught me that, sweetheart," Sarah replied. "You were brave enough to ask the hard questions, to listen, to understand." A knock at the doorframe interrupted them. The diner owner stood there with a grin. "Sorry to break up the moment, but folks are asking for the guest of honor outside. Time to cut that housewarming cake." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of cake and conversation, laughter and tears, until the sun began to set and guests slowly departed. Each one hugged Sarah and Emily, leaving them with leftovers and promises to visit soon. As the last car pulled away, Sarah and Emily stood on their new porch, arms around each other's waists. The yard was scattered with empty plates and forgotten cups, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to care just yet. "Want to help me clean up?" she asked Emily. "Actually." Emily hesitated. "Would it be okay if I wrote in my journal for a while? I want to remember everything about today." Sarah smiled and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Of course. I'll handle this. Go right." They worked in companionable silence as twilight deepened, Sarah gathering dishes and straightening chairs outside. Emily curled up in the porch swing with her journal, the scratch of her pen a gentle counterpoint to the evening crickets. Looking at her daughter in the gathering dusk, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The house behind them was more than rebuilt wood and fresh paint. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of truth, to the strength of community. But most of all, it was a symbol of the deepened bond between mother and daughter. Sarah gathered the last of the plates, pausing to watch a firefly dance across the yard. In that moment, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks, not just for the rebuilt house or the supportive community, but for the precious gift of starting over with her daughter by her side. Their relationship stronger than ever. The porch swing creaked gently as Emily wrote, her face serene in the soft glow from the new porch light. Tomorrow would bring a sunrise over their own roof again, and Sarah could hardly wait to greet it. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Sarah Mitchell, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.